Hello, this is the Open Source Security Foundation Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group meeting. Today is October 26th, 2020, and let me pull up the agenda doc here really quickly so you can see what's in stock today. So I didn't put it, but some helpful person left a note to ensure that the meeting is being recorded, for which I thank you. And I haven't seen it before, so but the meeting is being recorded, so so we should be good. And our usual opening section is welcoming new team members. So is there anyone who's here for the first time? Unfortunately, I missed the previous meeting and it wasn't recorded, so I don't know who has been here the last time. I definitely see a few familiar faces from past meetings. Is there anyone new that I haven't met yet?
Okay, yeah, 3 seconds from White Source, yeah. Hi.
Okay. So what's your interest in this group? And welcome.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I'm working the product management group at White Source. So we spend most of our time with open source dependencies, in particular vulnerabilities. And I joined White Source after building a open source dependency automation tool called RenovateBot. So I've been living my life in dependencies for about the last 3 years, a little by accident.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool to have you. It's actually, I think there's a lot of overlap between your work and what we're trying to do here. So welcome once again. Anyone else that I haven't seen before?
I joined the last meeting, but this one, I guess I'm a member now of the group. My name is Martin. I work for Red Hat Product Security. I'm a software engineer, and so I work on the tools that produce some of our security data and then support some of the internal workflows of the product security team. And my main interest in this group is just definition, I guess, and use of standards to share security data. And I have a bit of experience with that, so I hope to be helpful.
Cool. There's actually a topic later on the agenda that I think we could use your expertise and input on. Okay, so as usual, I'll start with some governance and organization topics. So after, it's actually, you can blame it all on me. It was on my to-do list for a long time. I put together a doodle poll to allow us to find a better meeting time. So if you haven't already, I know that some of you already responded. But if you haven't, like take the time to let us know which times work best for you. And after some time of no new responses coming in, I'll use this doodle to suggest either a totally new time for our working group meetings, or maybe like 2 candidate times that we could alternate between to accommodate people from different time zones. If like the distribution of answers is going to be like bimodal, but there are going to be 2 outstanding times that work for many folks, we might do it like that. I know that of a few kind of successful working groups in the industry that kind of use that, and I think it's cool to accommodate people from different time zones. I don't think we've had like, for example, the problem of like people from APAC wanting to attend, people from Europe, and people from Americas trying to attend. I think this group is mostly Europe and Americas, but if we could open ourselves to maybe people from APAC who would want to attend, then why not? One other thing that we haven't discussed is like the cadence of those meetings, because like historically we have inherited the cadence of every 3rd week from the Open Source Security Coalition days. If this doesn't work for us, it would be lovely to for you to state that. You can put a comment on this GitHub issue number 63, or post your preference on the email list. So maybe I'll, as an action item for myself, I'll start that thread somewhere here, because like time of the meeting is one thing, but cadence is also important. Does that make sense? Or does anyone have a strong opinion they want to voice right now?
I'll just add for you, Marcin, that there have been many meetings like this. Not this one, obviously, but I've not been able to attend due to various standing conflicts. So I think having alternating times is lovely, because there's always going to be somebody we miss.
Right, definitely. Okay, so I'm gonna definitely take that into consideration, because I like took a preview on the poll results. There's definitely more than one time slot that works for a lot of people. So I think we should be able to do that, and perhaps that way we're gonna be able to have like a more frequent cadence of meetings as well, which I think would be pretty cool.
And just a thought on that one. I don't think we want to wait too long to decide on those dates, because I know I picked what's currently free for me. And once I get to about 1 to 2 weeks out from a particular week, it starts to fill, because unfortunately my life is very full of meetings.
Oh, I think that's a common. I don't want to call it a problem, but I think that's a common phenomenon. Okay, so would it make sense for us to time box this? Say I'll wait for the results until the end of this week, basically, and then try to announce a new time, essentially, so that we have clarity starting next week. Okay, cool. That's a very good outcome. Thank you. Alrighty, and as for if you're okay, we can move to other topics. Or is there anything else that I haven't thought about for like the meeting times and cadence and stuff?
I just had one comment. I had my hand up in the Zoom. I don't know if we're using that. Just to echo on the last comment. Alternating meetings, perfect, sounds good. My only ask would be, when we schedule the meetings, can we, schedule out the next 6 months plus of meetings, like get them all blocked in the calendar? Because I have the same problem. If the meeting's not blocked like a month ahead of time, it'll probably get consumed by something else, and it gets really challenging juggling everything.
Oh, okay. So our approach here was like a little bit different in that all the meetings are on the community calendar. So like we could do two things. I could add you to that invite, or you could copy that invite to your calendar.
Yeah, I got the community calendar. So if we're going to use that, that's great. If we're going to block those like a couple of months ahead of time, and that's perfect.
Yeah, because those that are in the community calendar are set up like in perpetuity, so they're just there. But maybe as we're gonna adjust the time anyways, I need to check, because I think when I add a meeting to the community calendar, I can invite people as well, which would kind of solve both cases. So I'll try to do that. So I'll try to invite the working group members and put it in the community calendar so that people from outside of the working group can attend as well. That was a good comment, thank you. Okay, so for today, actually, I wanted to talk about two things. And recently we've had a PR, and I think you had a discussion with that Rob led about like what is it that we want to this working group to be concerned with, and one of the first items that is there on that list is that we identify and try to address security pain points for different parties involved in open source security. And based on the different discussions and presentations that we had in past meetings, I think we focused on like maintainers, consumers of open source, and security researchers as the main kind of actors in this ecosystems that we're interested in. So this is a topic that I think could generate a lot of our the agenda for our future meetings and activities. And the other topic is slightly more tactical in nature, in that previously we have come up with a vulnerability description, like a metadata format in JSON. And we had a use case for that was centered around like automation of a workflow between HackerOne and GitHub, and this is where we wanted to apply that. But Martin brought up a very good question, like if this is the best use of our time, because there are a number of competing or complementary standards that we could potentially use to address the same goal. So if we could like do a little bit of a discussion if we want to continue working on that schema, or if this is something we totally want to drop and put our collective efforts in making sure that the existing standards are better suited to the pain points we're trying to address for different actors in the ecosystem and the community. That would be awesome. Does this sound like a good plan for today?
Yep.
Okay, coolio.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I was just in agreement, not adding anything.
Alrighty. So based on your experience, like what are the main security pain points for, I don't know if we have people here who are going to represent the maintainer community. I think we do. And for consumers, I think we're kind of missing a bit of the security research kind of perspective, but maybe we can work on.
I can speak to security researchers partially. My side project is, I think I mentioned this last time, but you weren't here, the Internet of Dongs project, which we collect vulnerabilities and do research on adult devices and report them to the people who are maintaining the software. And it is a mess. So I can definitely talk to that part of it.
Okay, awesome. So what kind of problems do you kind of see there that we could potentially like either try to address or try to come up with maybe not a solution, but we can engage other groups of like industry working groups and standard bodies and stuff like that.
So I think kind of referencing the second point in the first point, without us having to necessarily do any design work, because I'm not sure that we want to do that. Today, I think part of something that I hear from a lot of people in the bug bounty groups that I'm in is they don't exactly know what information is going to be needed or useful. So you'll go to a website and you'll see that there's a security.txt to the website or something. There's certain things you'll expect. There's an email or there's a text file or other things, or maybe they've got a bug bounty program like HackerOne, and that is helpful. But for those who don't have a bug bounty program, what do I need to provide to make this an effective report? And then after I figure out what I need to provide, something that a lot of us have had conversations about is it's a black box to security researchers. What generally happens next for a successful report flow? And so I think being able to suggest that here are some common patterns or standards that are in use, and so you should expect next to receive an email update. They're going to attempt to verify it. After they attempt to verify it, they're going to try and get an ID number, and then they're going to try and put out an advisory to their consumers, and then they're going to try and patch it. So just that whole workflow, giving them a high level bird's eye view of like, here's what's going to happen, and it's going to take a while. And then you may be called in to do, you know, a responsible joint disclosure if there's going to be media, because the media may want to talk to you. and just all of those things, like what happens. And so a lot of people are just like, I don't know, I submit it into this black box and occasionally they ask me later to talk to them. So I think just being able to provide guidance on, here's what you should provide them, here's what you should expect to happen next, here's what you should be ready for, and here's the standards you can look at, because it's going to vary by company, but here's the top 4 standards or whatever.
Right. So that sounds a lot like managing or fostering like more standardization for vulnerability disclosure programs, because like I think like, correct me if I'm wrong, but if someone, I would assume, like starts a bug bounty, they kind of should have like higher level of maturity, and hopefully they flesh those things out. For vulnerability management, vulnerability disclosure programs, like if someone just puts out a security TXT file and an email inbox with a PGP key, you really can't have that feeling that you're submitting into a black box. Like I hate to like call people out, but Reid, do you offer some, I don't know, like templates or things like that for programs on HackerOne that kind of help them get started in this direction?
Yeah, I mean, we, as people are launching programs, we help them. Well, we talk to them about what's going to be the scope of what's, their program, whether it be a VDP or a bug bounty program. VDP being just a purely vulnerability disclosure program. And then we have templates that put together, okay, what are the things that you're interested in? What are the things you don't want interest in? And kind of what that process looks like. And then, the platform itself offers a lot of information on the time to certain things, time to triage, time to bounty if it's a bounty program. So try to give some transparency to the researchers as they're submitting stuff. Obviously the big thing here is that communication is one of the most important things, is just making sure that you're setting expectations with both sides, and that you're updating those expectations if things change. And so I think but yeah, this comes up all the time, as far as programs want to do good by the researchers and want to have a good reputation and good communication with them. So this is something that we strive to at least work with them and make sure that happens.
And then from my side of things, the HackerOne templates are very handy. Like, people who participate in that are a lot less confused and concerned. So what y'all are doing is definitely useful.
But for an open source community, though, they may not be using HackerOne, right? They may not be offering a bug bounty. And I think, using a template for a VDP can come from the ISO standards, 29147, 30111. You can also look at first.org. There's the PCERT SIG that's created the PCERT framework as a guide. But I think the key is that for every open source project of some weight that can handle it, right, should have a VDP where they talk about, what's expected, how to work with us, and what information is needed. I couldn't agree more, Nicole. I think that's a big miss for a lot of places to not have that, that kind of transparency. And even then, it's going to be an evolution for whatever project is implementing that. They're going to have to recognize that it's not a one and done. You don't just publish something and you're finished. You're going to learn from the researchers you're engaging.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, because a lot of more mature projects, especially with corporate participants, are perfectly capable and resourced to do that. But there's a lot of open source communities that A, don't know where to start, and B, don't even know how such a program might look like, because it's not their speciality. Right, they're experts in writing web frameworks or whatever else, but they're not necessarily expert on handling security vulnerabilities. So I'm wondering if what we could do as a working group to kind of help those communities that don't have access to that expertise and infrastructure.
Sorry to interrupt on that point, but I think it makes a lot of sense that for us to help come up with that framework, and we can benefit from what's been done in maybe the closed source community. So just so everybody knows, right? I'm Josh. I work at Intel and I run their PSERT team bug bounty program, and we have challenges right now between us and the open source community, right? There's a lot of our products that may be closed source that depend on open source components, and we're developing our communication strategy back and forth on what is the best way to handle those vulnerabilities that have and are affected by the open source community or affect the open source community. And I think this is where we can benefit each other, those that have experience in open source and those that spend time in closed source. How do we work together better, and what structure do we set up to communicate? And I think you're starting it right by focusing on the pain points for the different areas. The one other area might be to add is closed source communities or vendors to this as a stakeholder, maybe.
Right.
For pain points.
Yeah, so in the past, I helped one of I have tried out the Node.js community and the OpenJS Foundation to kind of make sure that projects either have for projects that are under some governance, there are clear expectations that that projects should have a security policy, that the security policy should have things like how to report a vulnerability, but on the other hand, that there is some help in terms of, okay, you put a security policy out there, but if someone actually emails you with a vulnerability disclosure, what do you do that? You discourage people from putting that in the public bug tracker, and you communicate with them later on, work on a disclosure. So I wonder if this is something where we could plan on working on a deliverable of some sort that would be like a starter pack for open source projects that they could adopt. And it's like, okay, we have an open source project and it's been fairly successful. We don't yet know how to do security, but we heard it's important. So how do we start? And then Open Source Security Foundation, being this vendor neutral organization, could actually say you know what, we have a guide and a set of templates that you could use to kickstart the whole thing off.
I will say that GitHub has security policy template, I believe, built into their tooling for repositories. Can choose to create one. And I know that HackerOne as well has a policy generator that can be used for both bug bounty programs and VDPs as well.
So one point that is probably also worth considering is to try consolidate documentation and also help point a little bit better, because there are things like the embargo, the OSS security embargo list called the Linux distro list, which can sort of short circuit a lot of the processes getting patches to distributions. But if you're not aware of the mailing list, you're not that likely to go to the list, and that sort of also sometimes makes it a bit confusing. How do you do embargoed vulnerabilities properly? How should you manage it? And what are the distributions or the different Linux distributions approach to handling embargoes as well? So sort of explaining that portion of vulnerability disclosure can also help get patches to the correct places.
Well, that's a fair point that we could even address. Okay, if you're a project, if you think you need to engage in a coordinated disclosure, who you reach out to, what are your options, how embargoes work and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think just handing out that information helps a lot to to projects that are in distributions or are packaged but are not sure how to approach the problem. So that will also be maybe a bit just not be that much work, but will help the community fairly easily, I think.
Cool. So we kind of moved slowly from security researchers to the maintainer community, and I think like this is probably the largest, like the larger crowd. Consumers are probably the largest crowd, but definitely the crowd of maintainers is larger than the security research community, I think. So I think in this group we really have like everyone in between, like people who have just put out like a hobby project, put it on GitHub, and it became success, all the way up to like commercial, multi-billion-dollar companies that either are built on open source as a business model, or as Josh mentioned, have like a significant or non-trivial open source footprint. So like at this point, I think I'm not even sure like which group on the spectrum we could even try to address.
Most of the pain points that are described under the security researchers could be improved with our recommendations to maintainers, because what the researchers have as a problem is that the maintainers don't know often how to run a successful disclosure program. So I think the pain points of the one and the pain points of the other are very interconnected.
That's a good point. And I would say that, I mean, you would address the stakeholders, I think, if you started by a tops-down perspective. Look at it from the point of view that, okay, you've got an open source project. How do you handle security vulnerabilities now? And this is the step-by-step down the line, right? These are all the things that you need to have in place in order to handle security vulnerabilities and to address the stakeholders' needs. Like, for example, having a VDP, how do you craft that? What infrastructure do you need in place to handle security vulnerabilities? Do you need to be a CNA? Should you be a CNA? What other ways can you get CVEs? What's coordinated disclosure, and how do you handle that? What makes it unique for open source? I know I'm rattling off a lot, but you can create this framework that would address all of this. It's again, what we did in the PCERT SIG is to create a similar framework for PCERTs, but we could overlay some of that into this space. It obviously would have to be customized, because I think, open source brings with it some unique characteristics.
I think we have to acknowledge as well, though, that, I believe, part of our mission, right, is to solve for this problem set in open source, where there will be mission critical projects where there are one maintainer who's doing this part-time, and they are not going to create a SIG. They're not going to do any of that stuff. So, they're probably not, they may not even be interested in addressing the vulnerabilities, right? Or not have that in the top of their priority list.
That's
so as a working group, like, we have to figure out programs and strategies that we can ease the burden to the maximum extent, I think. And that should really be kind of what we have as a goal, right? Is how can we build programs and policies that help the community so that these maintainers don't have to deal with a lot of that, because they simply won't have the time, and in some cases, or the interest.
I want to interrupt for just a second, because is this a topic this group should be discussing, or should maybe one of the other OpenSSF groups be taking this on? Like, this is a big elephant we're talking about here.
Yeah, like that seems more of a in incentives and open source sustainability discussion. Like there is a piece of code, and if this piece of code, while being important for its downstream consumers, like, is it set up in a way that's sustainable going forward? And security is a part of it. Whereas I think this working group, like, it's focused on vulnerability disclosure, or at least that has been like our initial charter, and the name of the group suggests that we want to deal with like the mechanics of like, okay, how do you submit? How do you disclose? Who do you disclose to and how? And like setting up, like this is just me thinking out loud. So I'm super happy to have that discussion continue. But I think like if we focus on like solving the, how do we help the entire open source ecosystem to set themselves up in a way that allows them to get to a point where it's able to deal with security reports, like that's perhaps not necessarily what we have started with in mind. If you all think that's a good thing for us to pick up, I'm super happy to talk some more about this.
I think it might be. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say I agree with what you're saying entirely. I just think we have to keep it in the back of our heads as well, though, that we have to make sure we don't create unrealistic burden. Sorry, go ahead.
So I think that it's kind of a good idea to keep in mind that people are going to be at different steps in the process, and maybe as we're developing the list of resources and whatever way that we're providing it to maintainers and reporters, it might be good to have maybe maturity markers. Like if you've ended up here and you're just looking for the simplest, fastest way, the most manual, simplest, fastest way to handle a security report that you've got, here's our recommended frameworks that are out there that you should look at. And here's a quick checklist of the processes you should follow. If you're more mature, you could do this. So maybe we take into consideration that people are going to be at all different stages of acceptance that this is part of something they need to do, and factor that in, but don't necessarily figure out how to progress them as part of our work.
So to try expand maybe a little bit on it, but we can try assume the person that looks up these resources are interested handling vulnerability disclosures, and that we're not trying to make maintainers interested, but we should maybe assume they are interested from the get-go. So you sort of narrow down the scope a little bit, so you can try cater to the maintainers that are interested, and when we have managed that part, we can maybe see how can we maybe improve the sustainability, because that's probably a larger topic. So yeah, it's my input at least.
I think it's both of those are good approaches. I think if we have a way for people to understand that there's pros and cons to implementing this. I mean, there's weight to it, but if you don't do it, you may have to deal with certain challenges around disclosure. You don't have a system in place. Not that it's a bad thing. It's just the fact of life that there may be procedural challenges for you, by not having an established system in place to handle these. Then you may not be at the right time in your maturity to be able to handle that. But as you grow, as the community grows or the project grows, you want to definitely be able to give them insight into how to grow into the space.
Yeah, and with that in mind, I think like that's just maybe my thinking, maybe, and I would definitely love to hear your opinion about this. But I think if we were to make a dent, then I think trying to help like the broad group do the minimum right thing is probably have a larger impact rather than trying to perfect what the large organizations do. Because like I'm still trying to kind of learn from this discussion, what is it that we focus on as a working group? And I think there's a lot that we could do in like for example, to use that example of something we have on the agenda for later today, is that we could have like a very informed discussion about trying to unify all those vulnerability and advisory automation standards, but I have a hunch that would help primarily like larger, more mature projects, and that is a perfectly legitimate area of focus. And since this is a volunteer group, like we can decide to focus on that. But on the other side of the spectrum, we could also try to focus like on projects that don't have anything today and would be better off having something like just a security policy, build some awareness around like what are the best practices for even accepting a vulnerability report, how to keep it private until disclosure, and basic stuff like that. But then again, we're getting back to the idea that there is a spectrum, and we have probably like finite time and resources here, and the question is, what do we focus on? Which really boils down to like, what do you feel is the impact we could make and should apply our resources to? That's a difficult question, though.
I mean, I think to that point, it would be best maybe to start with, I think, I forget who mentioned it earlier, but start with the assumption that there's somebody who's interested in doing this and they've ended up here because they don't currently have a process, and have that be like our first goal. And if we can solve for the person who's already interested and wants to do a thing but doesn't know what to do, and give them something to work with, we can then keep working up the maturity ladder ourselves later, but we could just start at the bottom and then go up.
Yeah, I think we could have a lot of impact if we focused on that. So maybe that's a separate discussion to be had. If we were to address that concern, like what kind of deliverables would we think about? So that would be an action item for me to start a separate discussion on GitHub or on the mailing list. Is how do we get that going? So we have spoken relatively little about consumers. So for consumers, what I'm thinking is that like facilitating CVs and getting that process more efficient for everybody is probably something that I think was permeating through a lot of our discussions lately. There's nothing that we should actually like reinvent or redesign, but making the current system easier to engage with, easier to consume information. Is that a fair assessment?
I think the point where you said easier to consume is, I think, the key point.
One other consideration I'd throw out from a consumer standpoint is around this conversation of software bill of materials and really having an inventory of the downstream libraries that are used. Maybe you consume Electron, and understanding all of the other dependencies that come with that, and being able to have that mythical single pane of glass view of all vulnerabilities affecting all of your downstream dependencies would be, I don't know, that's maybe outside the scope of this working group, but from an open source consumption standpoint, that's a big challenge.
So what I think enabling consumers of security disclosures is actually to try standardize on the data formats that we propose to push forward. I've talked with Marcus from SUSE, and I was just asking if they provide an API for their secure advisories, and they said no, because there's simply no standardized JSON schema that people standardize on. So I think trying to figure out the sort of the last point in the agenda, which JSON schemas or which data formats do you want to try push forward as standards, helps the sort of can push the consumers forward in positive direction. And it's probably one of the largest hurdles of consuming vulnerability disclosures currently.
I will also add that a lot of these open source projects don't realize that they are producing something that others are consuming. I've read a couple of tools that try to intake vulnerability data, and we have like block parsers in there and scraping HTML and diffing websites just to get that information. So I think the focus of this group should also be teaching the projects that, hey, others are interested in this information, so you should publish it in a machine readable format.
So this kind of feeds back into the discussion we just had about maintainers, that they seem to be in the group of they want to do something, not necessarily know how to do it well. And this would be like how to publish vulnerability information so that it's not just readable to humans, but also available for like software consumption would make a dent as well. In that, like if we could promote that, and maybe that's actually a good segue into the other topic. So how would we go about doing that? Is this something that we would solve by proposing a data format and promoting that and putting like the Open Source Security Foundation weight behind it? Or does it make more sense to make sure that other industry formats or standards are applicable and work well for those kinds of scenarios in open source?
There's reference the XKCD comic about standards here.
Oh, I think we should add it to meeting minutes, like at least a link to it.
But I personally would love to instead help aggregate what standards are out there, and then be able to say we recommend this one and this one because they seem to be most complete, but here's the 5 that are out here and popular. We recommend this one because it's most complete, and then maybe we could talk to that group and make recommendations. But I think we should avoid creating any kind of new standards. We should instead say, here's what's out there, here's what we recommend, and then maybe let that who's ever maintaining that standard know we feel that you're missing X and Y and Z, and not necessarily try to solve that ourselves.
I agree.
So yeah, so we sort of had this discussion last meeting with I forgot his name, Martin, which explained the Oasis advisory schema, and then we also sort of went through that part. So what I think would help, sort of like also people that provides data schemas and consumers, is to say these are the standards and these are the sources that is currently using it, as both as examples and sort of to underline that there are people using it and not just we recommending something. So I do think it's better to not do anything ourselves, but to try ensure that the Mitra CVE automation group is successful, and that we also can try ensure that the Oasis advisory schema is applicable to all the use cases that we can come up with.
Okay, so is there, because the way I'm kind of reading this is that there are 2 things to be done. Getting back to this education bit, we educate open source maintainers. If you're publishing a security advisory, here's how you do that so that it's consumable by others. in a standardized way. And then we work with all the different industry kind of standardization bodies and working groups to identify the standards that could fit the bill and make sure they are easily used in the open source context. And even if, and I think this is a comment that was posted under this GitHub issue, even if the format itself is complex because the domain of vulnerability, security, and disclosures is complex, so the data format that needs to fit a number of different use cases is probably going to be complex as well. So the question is, if we just educate and promote and make sure and work with the standard groups to address open source use cases, or do we also kind of maybe work on some tools to make work with those data formats easier if those data formats are do not come with any sort of tooling themselves, which I'm assuming might be the case. So that we only have a data format, but we don't have an easy way of generating them, not an easy way of consuming them, that sort of thing.
So while you were talking, I just realized that we're sort of now conflating two kinds of maintainers, both people that maintain open source software and then maintainers as in people that provide advisories. So I think we should maybe add a fourth stakeholder, which is sort of like maintainer, consumer, security researchers, but also providers, because that's sort of a separate role where you don't necessarily maintain software, but you provide security vulnerability reports to people. And that's sort of what Cargo can fill that role. NPM, Arch Linux, Red Hat, OpenSUSE. They're not only maintainers, but they're also providing advisories. And that maybe helps the discussion a little bit, pointing out that we need to educate providers and not only maintainers. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that's maybe helps the vocabulary to describe the problem a bit better.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense in that sometimes, in perhaps for smaller projects, like people who issue the, say, vulnerability reports and security advisories are the same people or organizations that actually maintain the software, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that case. Actually, it's not even the case for the Node.js and the NPM community. So there are a number of different kind of parties involved in that ecosystem, and NPM is just one of them. Some of them open source, some of them commercial. So yeah, that's a very good call out.
Yeah, I mean, I especially agree with that one, just because of like if the tooling itself supported it, NPM, bundler, things like that. If it supported understanding that there's vulnerabilities in the things that are being installed, it can at least warn the the developer when they're installing things like, hey, this has a vulnerability, you should check in on this. So I think that's a very important part of kind of the vulnerability disclosure ecosystem, to make sure that there's very good integrations with those tools.
To the consumers, I would also add one more stakeholder. So people that vendor libraries or code from other upstreams. So a bunch of Go projects nowadays, they vendor a lot of stuff. Sometimes they are not even using, and it's really hard to track down, especially for us downstream. And yeah, we need to have a way to notify those other upstream maintainers that they are consuming something that's broken or have a security issue,
Yes, so that gets us back to the whole software bill of materials kind of discussion. And that's actually, I think, a good question to ask, if software bill of materials is something that should be somehow in scope of this group, because I think it's a prerequisite for vulnerability management. But I'm wondering, and there's definitely an overlap between disclosures and managing your bill of materials. But I'm wondering if there's anything that we would want to address or improve in this particular space.
So just piping in as someone who has to occasionally deal with SBOM, because for GitLab, we write a dependency scanning tool. That is its own very, very large topic. So as much as I feel like that does need a group to address it, I'm not sure that we could bite that off as part of this group without being completely subsumed by having to deal with all the intricacies there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Nicole. In fact, what the Digital Bill of Materials group, though, is set up to deal with this. So that's run out of the Linux Foundation. I don't think it's part of OSSF, but it's called DBOM, Digital Bill of Materials.
Yeah, but we could definitely make sure that whatever we propose in and whatever we work on in the vulnerability disclosure space is sort of in sync with other SBOM or DBOM kind of efforts in the industry, so we don't create something that's unconsumable.
Yeah, there's a very significant SBOM work in the industry already that's being led by NTIA. And there are 2 or 3 different formats that are being shuffled. As others have said, it's a huge beast in and of its own right, but there's a substantial working group that's already working on that. I can send out some references if people are interested. I think they might have already been shared in GitHub, actually, on one of the GitHub issues.
Yeah, I think in one of the previous meetings we've had some discussions about this already, but this is definitely one of the things where I think we should make sure that we're following rather than we lead, right? Just to stay in line with where the industry is moving.
Definitely.
So we have about 5 minutes to go. What do you think are like 1 or 2 topics that we should focus on in going forward after this meeting? So should we think about some deliverables, maybe around having like a list of again, but this time like not in a meeting but documented, of all the different standards and how do we see them fit the open source security kind of disclosure ecosystem, to even advise like, okay, if you want to do it today, even if we were not to change the state of the industry today and not do something and just make a recommendation, what would we recommend? Would that be something that you think would be like a good deliverable for this working group?
So, I mean, for what it's worth, I think just knowing what standards exist would be enormous. The discoverability of this stuff is a nightmare, and there's a lot of different groups that are doing this work.
Yeah,
I mean,
I second that. I learned a few of them just following the discussions on this very working group.
Exactly. Like, I feel like I should say I thought I understood all this, and embarrassingly, like half the standards that have come up in these discussions, I'm like, I don't even know where the hell this came from, which is ridiculous.
So Eva had posted, and I think it was a good idea to also polish up our list of who we think the stakeholders are, and kind of crisp up those pain points. So I think potentially starting a place where we believe the stakeholders list is going to end up and working on that, and then starting a list of, and I don't know what the correct terminology is, but what if we started like a list of, here's all the standards and working groups we know of for these different areas, and like basically just had it blank and we all start filling in what we know, and then maybe we push it out to our networks and have other people toss in additional ones, And so don't even get into where does this fit? Just literally get into, let's make a list of these specific types of standards that are out there and gather that up before we even figure out like, here's how you stitch them together or anything else.
Yeah, even defining what the problem is we're trying to solve here, you know, crisping that up so that we, you know, that all that threads together, and then figure out how do we solve that by, you know, what documentation we might create or framework or whatnot. Yeah, maybe it's something a lot simpler than all that.
Yeah, I think that would be brilliant to have that sort of an overview. So it could start as a markdown document here in this working groups repository that we could make a PR, and then we could continue that discussion, you know, in a PR. So I can take an action item to like collate the standards and organizations that have been mentioned already, and then we could take it from there and see if there's anything that is missing, and if we, you know, have touch points, and do we know people that are participating in those organizations, and try to recap that work in the next working group meeting. Okay, we have 1 minute to go. That was an amazing discussion, and I enjoyed it a lot, and I think we have a plan going forward. Is there anything else that I missed or we should be talking about?
Thank you for wrangling all this.
Oh, I haven't. I'm just a talking head. So thank you to you all for participating. And I don't know who's taking all of those amazing notes, but you have my eternal gratitude.
It's a GitLab default. We always take notes, so it's trained into me.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we're at the top of the hour. I'll upload the recording to YouTube, and I'll let you know when it's up. And I'll post the note. I'll transform those notes into a markdown document in the repository as well. Okay, thank you all. Take care.